Hello, and welcome to another episode of Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Please join our experienced and knowledgeable panel of hosts as we explore the great mysteries of our time: Bigfoot, UFOs, ghosts, and unexplained phenomena.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Tonight, Mike and I are joined by our UFO expert, William Pullin. He's going to talk primarily about the Men in Black, but a number of other things I think it's important we touch on, especially events as they relate to the UFO community and they make the news. So first of all, good evening, William, and happy birthday. Happy birthday for yesterday.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me on. Hope you are well. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I was not so well, as you know, but I'm a lot better now, and I'm feeling positive. I was running this morning early on before I was teaching, so I'm back to normal, and I appreciate you asking.
Oh, good man. So, good to hear. So,
thank you, man. So one of the points I thought was really important that it was remiss if we didn't cover, I know we're going to talk about the Men in Black today, was this announcement. I saw news in both April and May that the U.S. government had officially come forward with, they were Pentagon released photographs of UFOs. What do you have to say about that? Were you excited or not excited? What was your view?
Well, they released these videos, which is interesting in and of itself. Because clearly these past several decades, the military/government has not been very comfortable or willing to even discuss the UFO topic, much less reveal what it may or may not have. So that was interesting. They released them. They did state specifically about the fact that these videos are real. In other words, they're not hoaxed. But we still don't know what the videos contain. They're still, by definition, UFOs. So it's interesting that they were released, but what they contain is still not really anything specific. Although there's always a section of society, and by extension the UFO community, that seems to feel that UFO means alien spacecraft. And the acronym UFO does not mean that. So that's kind of a rough-edged way that people are accepting this stuff. But it's very interesting because it's different than everything else that's happened in the past. Before we had to go through FOIA requests to get anything from the government. But now this has come out, so it's interesting in of itself. But we still don't know what the videos contain. So that's about it.
So when we look at them, and I was looking at them, I've looked at them a few times, and I was looking at them again just before the show so I could ask you about them. They look, with a very, very non-detailed eye, I admit that, but they look a bit like the classic sort of 1950s UFOs from science fiction. I mean, they seem sort of quasi-spherical, for want of a better word, and they're behaving erratically. They're traveling at speeds that aircraft can't normally travel at. They don't seem like meteors. I was cautiously impressed by them. Do you have a view on what they might be? I'm asking you to speculate, and I know you're very methodical, but if you had to speculate, what do you think they might be? Or are you just going to say, I'm not sure?
You know how I work at them. I'm always comfortable saying I don't know. But I'm in the same boat with you. I mean, it's certainly very interesting, and they're somewhat suggestive, at least the form of the classic flying disc, flying saucer from the 1950s, 1960s. That's interesting. The flight characteristics, I recall in past cases that people would describe these things as when they would slow down, they would kind of act in a falling leaf motion, and then when they gained speed, they were more dynamic, something that our aircraft couldn't follow, couldn't intercept, and so that seems suggestive of that. I still go with the more likely explanation. This may be secret military aircraft, a drone of some sort, something advanced that the civilians aren't aware of. But because we don't really know, we have we have a shortage of data. The extraterrestrial explanation is still there. It's not very likely, but it's still there. So
I'll tell you what intrigued me about it. I mean, I do think with some of these, I mean, I don't have any insight into, let me say, into the American military operations, and if I did, I wouldn't be sharing it on a radio show. But the triangular shaped craft, I often think that they could well be advanced tech. We know that, often the technology that the military are using could be up to 20 years ahead of what we're actually seeing. The thing about this, though, is the more plausible and rational explanation, I'm with you, would be some military craft, in the same way as blackbirds, as spy planes were flying around for many, many years before their ultimate shape was released.
Yes.
But here, you have a Pentagon release. So I can't see myself. It seems to me incongruous that the Pentagon would release photographs of its own or release video of its own capability, which if it really did have that, because that would be surely giving information to its enemies. I mean, what do you say about that? Am I right or wrong? I don't mind if you think, no, I'm wrong, but I'm just interested in
I think you're spot on. I mean, that is completely logical. Why would a government or military release videos that would display some of its own secret technology? They wouldn't. It would be, that's not what a government would do. I mean, you're not going to release secret information, technology, or documentation for public consumption. That's not going to happen. So I'm with you. They release videos, and I think the fact that they release them argues against this being secret military technology, because if it was, they would be reticent to release it at all. So I'm with you with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was quite compelling, because it would go against everything that they're ever told to, and I think they would be very reluctant to do that. The other point I thought was interesting, and I wanted to get your view on, and ladies and gentlemen, we didn't discuss this before the show, so that William and I can come to it fresh. I wanted to bring it live. Is this point? Why did they pick? Is there any significance, should I say, in them choosing to release this information in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, do you think? I'll ask you that, and then I'll come on with a follow-up point. Let me just ask you that, William. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I think the public is certainly distracted by the COVID-19 issue, rightfully so. The public is certainly being inundated with a lot of misinformation, which is making a very serious issue being taken less than seriously by some leaders and some people in the public. Having said that, I don't know if there's if there is a specific time they want to release these things. They did this on purpose during this issue. I don't know why. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out why the military would be comfortable enough to release this in the first place, regardless of the timing. But there could be something to that. So, but I don't know.
Well, let me tell you what the tangentially I was thinking about this was that often, in politician press releases, bad news is often released in times when people are distracted. It's a well-known fact that if there's some big event, it's often released, something that they don't particularly want to release, but they have to, is sort of slipped under the carpet. And by the same token, this could be a possible way of leaking information to acclimatize the general public about the significance of this during a time when they're distracted, and this gradual process of acclimatization is accelerating pace. That was something that struck me as a possibility, and I don't expect you to tell me, oh yeah, I'm absolutely right or wrong. I just thought it was an interesting point, and I just wondered if you had any comment on that.
I think that's certainly a possibility. I mean, you're exactly right. The government and the military are very measured the way they release information as far as timing, and that depends whether it's news that is to their advantage, or if it's news that is they really don't want to release, but they have to. It's not very positive in nature. So that having said that, it's certainly a possibility that this was released with a certain timing in mind, so that either it's embraced or not embraced as much as it would be if there was, say, a clean slate, or was no other news story to distract us from this release. So all those are distinct possibilities. I mean, when something like this happens, I like to look at the content, but also the context, as far as when it's released, why is it being released, what's the motivation, is this advantageous for the military to release or the government? That's part and parcel for the investigator to look at and say, okay, why is this being done now? Is there a reason? There may not be a reason, but we still should look at those things and try to figure out what's going on. So, but I'm with you. That's certainly a possibility. You know.
Well, if you hear of any more news around that point, I'll certainly look for it. But if you have far more contacts in the field than I do, so if you hear of any more news, I'd be grateful if you could bring us up to it, because I think it's probably, for me, it's a hugely significant story, and I think, you know, with my first degree in history, I think that will be in the future a big component of pop culture in the future. 20 years from now, we'll be talking about that as a significant event. There's my prediction on it. Okay, let's talk about the Men in Black. Now, can we first of all start with some context? What's the class? I mean, Men in Black seems kind of obvious, but there's more to it than that. Can you give us a sort of classic physical description of the Men in Black, other than obviously they wear black suits?
Well, yeah, that's true. They do wear black. It seems to be their color of choice. The classic look for the Men in Black was established in the mid-1960s by John Keel. Tend to be tall, slim, Caucasian or Asian-looking gentlemen, although there are reports of women. They wear black suit and tie outfits, completely black. I mean, down to the shoes, down to the socks, down to the ties, everything. They tend to drive classic long vehicles that are at least 10 to 15 years old at the time of deciding. And their mannerisms are odd. They seem to perspire. They seem easily distracted. Their language sometimes is slurred, as if they're slightly intoxicated on some level. And I don't know why that would be. And their mannerisms just seem uncomfortable, like they're always looking at their watches. They're wanting to go somewhere. They're clearly not comfortable interacting with people, as unlike what you and I would, how we would interact in a very cordial, comfortable manner. They seem very uncomfortable. And there are some reports where Men in Black are seen to be wearing thick, heavy makeup, which makes them look like they're sweating profusely. That's the general description. There's a few little nuances here and there according to what side you look at, but the general look is, you know, tall, all in black, and with strange mannerisms to their behavior.
Now, we'll come on to why that might be the case shortly. And I understand, you know, the image of them coalesced, if you like, into the archetype that you've very competently articulated in the 1960s. But it started earlier than that. Did it start? Did they first come into public consciousness, am I right, in June 1947 with these fishermen who said they'd seen the Men in Black? Is that right?
Yeah, their names, Harold Dahl and Fred Crispin. They were involved in the Morgan Island UFO case, and professionally, I found that case to be a hoax. But having said that, those two individuals were named in an article written by Gray Barker. Gray Barker was a member of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, and he named, it was an article that appeared in the early 50s, and he named several individuals that allegedly had interactions with the Men in Black. Now, this is prior to the John Keel description, but they described individuals that were clearly not threatening them physically, but pushing them to not talk about their UFO events, making them uncomfortable, and suggesting in a roundabout way that they not talk about this with anybody. And the individuals that came into contact with these people tended to follow those instructions to the letter. So, but Crispin and Dahl were named in that article, and they themselves did describe some interactions with individuals that were strongly suggesting they should not discuss their UFO experiences.
Now, there's several things I can say about this. I mean, one of the first things is, I'll put it to you, and then I'll tell you a couple of things that I think, and again, we can invite that discussion. Why would they be dressed like this? Why would they drive a vehicle, as you say, that's out of date? Why would some of them have makeup? Do we have any answers or what's the speculation about all of this, first of all?
Yeah, I don't know. That's part of from a research standpoint, that's part of the problem. When we discuss cases, scenarios, documentation, individuals of note, there are a few things we could draw that are logical. We could draw conclusions from what we know about history, what transpired, what the data suggests. As far as the Men in Black, why they're dressed that way, why their mannerisms are different than normal human beings, why are they driving automobiles that are decades old but look pristine in condition, there's no logical way to look at that and make some sort of a logical conclusion as to why that would be. I don't know. It's interesting. Was that image created in the mind of John Keel? I tend to think not, because the sighting reports of these individuals are extremely similar. And a lot of the individuals that saw these Men in Black had no idea who John Keel was and didn't read his literature. So there's not a very good chance of any kind of contamination going on there. So why they look like that, why they dress like that, I have no idea.
Do they ever say themselves where they're from? Any of the witnesses ever say, well, who are you? Where are you from?
No, they're very vague. They don't give any details. Not at all. They're, I guess I'll use the same word again. They're extremely vague with a capital V. They don't tell you where they're from, what agency they work for or represent. License plates on the cars are either non-existent or you can't track them down. And they seem to be single-minded in their approach. They rarely threaten you physically with harm. They just strongly suggest, somewhat ineffectually, that people don't talk about the UFO experiences. Beyond that, they don't provide any details about themselves. So we're kind of at a loss to draw any conclusions as to where they are from their own behavior. So it's another problem.
You see, one of the pretty obvious points I would think about myself if I was in surveillance is if somebody wanted to make surveillance, they're inconspicuous, if you like. So you're much more likely to be a man in grey. If you want to track somebody, you blend in. You're not really tall, you're not really short, you're sort of average looking, average build. You're as inconspicuous as possible. And that's how you might track somebody. But these people were in the other way. They're as conspicuous as possible. When I've seen modern day videos of these people, I'm coming on to that later. For example, they're wearing things like black trilbies. They are very conspicuous, and it's like they're making a statement. What do you think about that? Have you got a view on that in any way?
That's one of the illogical aspects of this, among other ones, of this scenario.
Yeah.
Is that you want to hide in plain sight. You want to look inconspicuous. You would not conduct yourself in a way, or dress in a certain way, or present yourself in a way where you stand out among the crowd. That's not what these agencies would normally conduct. That's not how I would do things. Not at all. These are the exact opposite, like you said. So it's illogical. You don't have any intelligence agencies in any government on the planet that have operatives dressing and acting like this, which is not advocating the extraterrestrial, but it's just interesting that what's being described is completely opposite from the way a intelligence officer or agent would work. They wouldn't stand out in the crowd. You couldn't see them coming. And the way the Men in Black are described, you can see them coming from a mile away. I mean, it's very illogical and makes it even more bizarre scenario than it already is.
Yeah, and you know, I'm just interested. You mentioned a very interesting point about some of them having slurred speech. Has anyone ever speculated why that might be? Because I've heard that on a number of cases. I've heard them having no eyebrows, slurred speech. Has anyone tried to speculate why they might behave in that way?
I heard some speculation from researchers that he felt they were creations. They were robots. They were androids. They weren't organic creatures per se. They weren't people. And their slurred speech he attributed to their power source running down, their batteries running down. Because there are a few cases, I misspoke, more than a few cases, where what's being described is the interaction with the Men in Black. And then for some unknown reason, the Men in Black feel like they have to leave. They have to vacate the premises quickly, and then they're gone. As if their batteries are running down, as if they're on a time clock, as if they have a limited time for interaction, then they have to adjourn. So the slurred speech characteristic has been attributed to a running down of the batteries, for lack of a better term. So, if they're robotic in nature, that's kind of logical. If they're running low on power, then their functions as a creation would tend to run down. That's pretty logical. It's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to add to that point, I'm not saying I necessarily believe it or not. You're just giving me a theory, but that would be one of the reasons why they might look at their watches a lot as well.
Yeah.
See how long they've got.
Yep.
See how long
clock,
they've got in the replacement. Yeah. Okay. Now, I don't know whether do you know about the figures. One of the cases I thought was particularly interesting was the case with Shane Sovar in 2008 in Niagara Falls. Do you know about that?
Only in passing. Some of these newer cases of Men in Black, I'm guilty of not examining them at length like I should. Although I've heard some researchers mention that there's been some interesting changes in some of the cases as opposed to what was being seen or reported, say, 30, 40 years ago. There's been some, developments as of late, but that would be me talking uninformed. So, but I'm not overly knowledgeable about that case, though. No.
Well, let me tell you a little bit because I think it's worth looking into at some point. So my understanding is from recollection. I was looking at it a few days ago, but the Shane Sovar is one of the witnesses to. He was in a hotel I think he was in Niagara Falls in 2008. This was. Basically, he and another chap, I forget the other guy's name right now, but they were looking and they saw triangular-shaped UFOs near their hotel, and they talked about it, and they were quite public about what they'd seen. They weren't afraid to talk about it, and they were quite happy chatting about it. And as a consequence, they said that Men in Black visited them. They said that, well, they not visited them personally, but they said that they had people in the hotel who were looking for them to talk about this whole incident, and people were not necessarily believing what they were saying. But then there's a video which you can see which show two figures who seem really quite tall in proportion to one of the hotel staff who's there on the left-hand side as they walk through. And they're walking into the hotel lobby, and they're dressed in a classic Men in Black uniform, for want of a better word, with this black coat, black trousers, black shoes, and the sort of trilbies. And they do look really quite sinister. And if you get a chance, watch it. Because I think I think it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah, and And this goes for the entire UFO field. It's worth examining, whether it's a case that someone knows a lot about or it's new content that's come out. That's all worth examining because this field is very fluid. What's being reported changes over time, and some things don't. It's interesting that the Men in Black, from what you described, the individuals on the video, are somewhat the same as they were, let's say, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So there's been a little modernization, but not to a great extent. It's a lot of similarities, so that's interesting.
Now, let's think a little bit about what they might be. I know this is all speculation, but speculation can be enormous fun sometimes, and especially if it's connected with the UFO field, it can be very serious as well. So, if they are government people, what might they want? Or what do you think their motivations might be?
I think it's to lessen the importance, if they are government individuals, if they're government agents. Their motivation is to lessen the importance of the UFO topic, to lessen the importance of sighting events, and to motivate people to not talk about what they've experienced. Back in January of '53, the CIA had a sponsored panel, the Robertson panel, and the head of the panel, H.P. Robertson, he was a well-known physicist. Actually, J. Allen Hynek was an associate member of that panel. They strongly advocated for the government and the military to tamp down the UFO sighting reports. In other words, make an attempt to make the topic less important or less interesting to the public. And so from that day forward, to greater or lesser degrees, the government/military has always made an effort to lessen the importance of the UFO topic. In other words, keep it out of the limelight, keep it out of the public eye. So my gut tells me that if these are government agents, they're simply following those motivations, following those guidelines, and trying to lessen the importance of this stuff. Because they're not. You rarely hear any physical altercations. It's just individuals that look sinister. They're clearly trying to motivate witnesses to not talk and to clam up. So I think it's part of that. What was established in the early 50s is kind of continuing now if these are government individuals.
You see, one of the things that I was quite interested in, I was reading some of the points, is that, obviously Mike and I come from a background where we're interested in undiscovered animals, Bigfoots and the like, and I don't get the impression, some people would disagree with me, I'm fine, that there's a particular interest by the government in what people like that are up to. Some people would kind of conflate their own abilities and ideas and importance, but there isn't generally the same level of interest. But there does seem to be a level of interest by government or by government agencies generally in what UFO groups might be doing or UFO enthusiasts might be doing. Do you have any view on that? Am I right or wrong? And if so, why would that be the case?
No, you're right. I mean, the U.S. military, and under the guise of Project Grudge and Project Sign and Project Blue Book, they were clearly interested in how the UFO buffs, UFO clubs were, promoting this kind of interaction, promoting the people, motivating people to talk. They're aware of what NICAP was doing, what APRO was doing, what MUFON was doing or is doing. So there's always been a much more stronger direct interest in the UFO topic as opposed to, the U.S. government is not overly enamored with or interested in Bigfoot or Dogman or what have you, or flying pterosaurs or whatever possibilities there are in the cryptozoological world. The government doesn't seem interested in that. But the UFO topic, I think, is a little different because that's a potential national security issue. Because if alien visitation is going on, that's a different angle. I mean, I don't know if Bigfoot is a mammal in North America, that's not a threat to the country. But alien visitation could be. So I think that's kind of the difference here or there.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. If you discovered Bigfoot, there certainly would be some disruption. Particularly in the areas where there's logging as an industry, but it wouldn't destroy the country or the economy. It wouldn't cause massive social upheaval. It would cause a lot of interest, but it wouldn't cause that social upheaval. I mean, one of the things that people have been frightened of in the past is that people might freak out and not be able to handle the truth of UFOs existing. Do you think that the government still has that view now, or are they sort of moderating more in their attitude?
Going back to the COVID-19 issue, I think the governments were kind of softening their approach on that. I think so. But when this COVID-19 issue came up, the way the public has been handling the issue, panicking and acting in very selfish ways, I think the government may have been maybe redoubled their efforts or re-examine the issue, saying, well, maybe the public isn't ready because, a pandemic is breaking out and people are not handling it very well here. How would they handle direct alien visitation? They may panic also. So the COVID-19 issue may have given them a preview as to how the public would react to direct contact with extraterrestrials. But and going back to the issue with cryptids and Bigfoot, you're right. The discovery of Bigfoot or another cryptid would have more localized influence, but it wouldn't break down sociological, political, or religious structures. Not that much.
No.
Alien visitation may have a much more direct influence on those things. So I can see why the government would be certainly more interested in what may happen with that. So,
you see, there was another, which is sort of tangentially linked. There was another big topic that was released and discussed, and again, it hasn't got that much press, which I thought was very interesting, which sort of has come very interestingly at the same time as the UFO, and that was the fact that scientists are now pretty sure that they have discovered a parallel universe or parallel universes. Did you read about that?
Yes, I've heard that, and science has been going in that direction for a while. At least in theory, science always, to a point, proves things on a blackboard, and then reality comes a little later. We're able to develop the technology or make the observations to confirm what was proven on the chalkboard. But science has been definitely. The discoveries are leading more and more strongly in the direction that we're not the only universe in existence. There are other dimensions and other universes that are existing on a different plane than ours. And going to the UFO topic, that has a direct bearing on that because the multi-dimensional, multi-universe theory to explain extraterrestrials, to explain UFOs, has kind of gained some traction as of late because of these scientific developments. So it's interesting what the future is going to hold. I mean, science, the knowledge science has about the universe around us increases as we get older as a species. So what will we know 10 years from now? Who knows? Very interesting.
Well, I thought it was one of the reasons that I thought it was interesting myself, and again, I'm sort of speculating, but that's what we're having to do at the moment. Is 2 points. First of all, when I was very young, the idea of parallel universes, if you had written as an undergraduate a physics paper, or even if you tried to get your PhD and argued about the existence of parallel universes, it would have been akin to heresy. You would have been Galileo in medieval, challenging the medieval Catholic Church. But these days, parallel universes are accepted, and the fact that there are official scientific papers which are talking about, well, there's this parallel universe and there may be many multiverses, and we talk about dimensions and what you can perceive in dimensions, and what you can see, and it's not remotely abstract. Am I right in thinking a lot of astrophysics, physics, and like has moved forward exponentially, almost beyond understanding in the last 20 years?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Usually, what happens in science is that new ideas are presented by the younger generations. They're not embraced. There's a good amount of pushback for the older generations. But those newer ideas tend to be embraced, I hate to say it like this, once the older generations die off. The changes come very slowly. It's very generational in that way. And you're right. When you and I were younger, multi-universes, multiple dimensions, were rarely discussed other than in science fiction books. Nowadays, there's peer-reviewed papers that discuss this in a very legitimate, grounded scientific way. So you're right. Our knowledge has increased exponentially, and that's continuing to this day. And I think, it's just a random speculation on my part, I think that as science moves forward, some of these things in the paranormal that seem anomalous now will be explainable scientifically, say, in a few decades or a few centuries. We just need to be patient. You and I may not live to see it, but at some point, we look back in history. Several hundred years ago, scientists didn't even embrace the reality of meteorites or comets. No. There were religious explanations for that. Science disproved those things and proved what they were. So with time, science proves and defines and explains a lot about the universe around us. So I think that's the case here.
I mean, I'm just going to go really sort of out there a bit, but I like to share my thoughts with you. You see, with space, and we're talking about traveling through space in a linear way. Even if you build a machine that is capable of traveling as close to possible to the speed of light as possible. So if you create a machine that can travel, it still would be generations before we reached a planet that may well have possibly conditions which are habitable. I'm not talking about something like Europa, which may have life, but of a basic kind. I'm not talking about that. I would get very geeked out if there were fungi on Mars or something like that, but it wouldn't excite most people. What you're looking for is something that's sentient or quasi-sentient. But but it would take a very long time to get to it, unless you can do something like warp space and use materials which do that. I mean, space isn't linear. Let me just say, I know that space is curved, but you've still got those very vast distances that you would have to travel, and unless you can in some way warp that space, then you can't. But if you're talking about parallel universes, really, what you're talking about is almost like an Alice look through the looking glass scenario, where you can move between those universes, you can move between those worlds. If you can find a way to do that, move between those worlds and or dimensions, that would seem to me, and this is wildly speculative, I know, William, and so feel free to comment or not dismiss what I'm saying. But that would almost seem easier than building, using the vast resources to cross quasi-linear space. I mean, what do you think about that?
That's true, because I mean, if a parallel universe exists or another dimension exists, and I'm comfortable saying that, I think it does. I don't know how many do, but I think that's pretty much grounded in reality. It may be, from a logistical standpoint, or technologically, it may be easier to travel between the universes than it is to travel, say, 30 light years at light speed, because our universe is so painfully large, it's vast, and the speed of light is so painfully slow to cover those distances. So even if you went 99% of the speed of light, it would still take you almost 5 years to get to the nearest star, another 5 years to get back. And that's the closest star, Proxima Centauri, about 4.5 light years. I mean, so you're talking about another star, say, 40 light years away, you're talking lifetimes of travel. That's not reasonable. Or logical, and then on the other side of the coin, the extraterrestrials, if they have come here to Earth, and I feel they have, they may know about a workaround, or they may know about scientific laws we're unaware of, physical laws we haven't discovered yet, which may allow faster than light travel or some workaround to make those distances shorter. But you're right. If there's a multi-universe or another dimension, it may be easier to travel along those lines than it is through normal space. That may be a strong possibility. And that's why I'm saying that theory, the interdimensional extraterrestrial, blurring words, the interdimensional multi-universe theory to explain UFOs is gaining traction because of the advances science has made. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was of a mind to build a ship, I think I'd probably build something along. I'd be investigating the possibility of penetrating or piercing into other dimensions or parallel universes. I think that might be possibly easier to achieve, but that's just speculation. Now, one of the points I had, going back to this topic of the potential men in black, and I don't know if you haven't seen this, then fair enough, I'd advise you to. But have you seen the testimony of the Roswell Mortician? Did you ever see that?
Yes, Glenn Dennis. Yes, at links. Yes, I have.
That's right. Do you mind just setting the scene for everybody? Because then I want to sort of ask you a question about that. I want to see what you think about that, because it links into Men in Black.
Well, Glenn Dennis was the local mortician in Roswell, New Mexico. And the story that he gave was that he was called one evening and asked about dry ice storage for small caskets. The military wanted several small caskets. It's just there for small children. He said he would have to order them. So that was kind of transpired. And at some point he stated that he drove to the Roswell Army Airfield, which is just south of Roswell, New Mexico, the town. This was Roswell Army Airfield prior to being Walker Air Force Base. The Air Force had not been established as a separate branch yet. That came later that year. But he stated that he wandered around the air base's hospital for a while. Came into contact with a nurse he knew. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Evidently, she had was involved in the autopsy of one of the bodies they recovered at either the crash site or the debris field northwest of town. But at some point after that interaction, that discussion with her, he was let out somewhat forcibly by some MPs and told basically under no certain terms to get the hell out. He used other language than that, stronger language. So and his testimony has been kind of a cornerstone in the Roswell case as such. He's one of the founding members of the International UFO Museum Research Center up there in Roswell. So, but his testimony is part of that whole scenario of what transpired there. So, and there's been some red flags around his testimony, and admittedly so. That should be noted too. But he discussed several things that were that made sense as far as how the military was reacting to what was going on. Because how the military reacts kind of tells you what's going on. If they are taking things in stride or they're acting like they got caught with their pants down. And that's what happened to Roswell. Their military clearly was not ready for what was going on, which leads strongly to the idea that it was at least something anomalous was going on, something out of the ordinary, not a weather balloon. So, but I've seen the testimony, very interesting.
I thought that was interesting, and I want you to tell me what you think of his credibility in a minute, because I've always been interested in him. But one of the things he said is the sort of thing that I feel people might say if they're under pressure and they're trying to preserve something, because this was obviously the height of the Cold War. I think this was in 1947. Just for everybody who doesn't know, Roswell was a place where nuclear weapons were being kept. The Soviet Union was a major threat then. This was an important and sensitive military area, and he was told that he said he may start talking about it, and the guy, I think in the video I was watching, I've watched it a few times. Basically, he was the guy who was the military officer said, if you start talking about this, boy, you're going to have your bones being picked out of the desert. And I thought that was more likely as a threat than somebody speaking in a slurry voice looking at his watch. I mean, first of all, what do you think about Glenn Dennis? Do you think he's credible or not credible? And second, what do you think about my point about that might be how somebody might really behave in those situations?
I think he's. I thought he was more credible in the 90s and early 2000s. I've discovered a couple of red flags in his testimony, just because he changed a few things that he stated. But I still find him relatively credible. And I'm with you. I think the what he described of being threatened with bodily harm, which clearly would make somebody not talk about their experience. That's kind of human nature. You get threatened, you're going to clam up. That's logical. That makes sense. If you're wanting to cover up the crash of something anomalous, maybe it doesn't have to be extraterrestrial, something they want to cover up, something they don't want the public to know about, something they want the story to go away. One way you would do that would be to maybe not directly threaten them, although that's one of the cards they'll play, but somehow motivate the public to not talk about their sightings, to not talk about their experiences. And if it was important enough, sure, I could see somebody being threatened with bodily harm. Of course, you're right. This is during the Cold War. The Roswell Army Airfield was the only atomically armed base on the entire planet at the time. The Soviets had not developed any atomic weapons at that point. They would pretty soon after that. So this is a very important base, and the idea that something anomalous crashed from a Cold War perspective, that the cover-up of Roswell makes sense, because you wouldn't want your enemies to find out what you'd recovered. If we recovered a UFO, an alien spacecraft, the last people we want to tell would be the Soviets.
Yeah.
We'd cover it up. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because you'd want the technology from it to give you that cutting edge. And then, of course, once you've got that, for national security, it becomes more and more difficult to not release that information. So you have to sort of keep that up, really. You're in a no-win situation, at least until all the people who made the original decision are very old or dead. And in some ways, it's parallels with the scientific community. Yeah. Now, when we've looked a little bit about Men in Black and what they might be, if they're government agents, and what their motivation might be. Let's turn it around. If they were alien, or of an alien disposition, or they were in some ways created by aliens, why would aliens? Some people have said this. There must be aliens. What benefit do you think could aliens have from speaking to people about these things?
I don't know. I can't think of a single reason. I think you and I are comfortable with the position that extraterrestrials are more advanced than we are. Therefore, they'd be more intelligent. That doesn't mean they're more peaceful, but they're more knowledgeable about the universe around us. They've been around longer, or they're simply more advanced than we are. So, what would they have to gain from interaction with humans? I don't know. And here I'm assigning human motivations to an alien species, which makes no sense whatsoever, because they didn't evolve here. By definition, they're alien. But if we're comfortable doing that, what would be the motivation? I don't know. If they didn't want a witness to talk about a UFO sighting, then I would want to make my craft invisible, so the sighting didn't occur in the first place. And two, if you and I are a pair of paleontologists, we're going to Africa to explore and look for some whatever. We're in the middle of some research work, and are we going to interact with mountain gorillas and try to communicate with them? Probably not, because there's some discourse that we can't. We're cross species. We can't communicate directly with each other. We know we're both intelligent species, but we don't speak gorilla. Gorillas don't speak English, so we can't make any headway. Extraterrestrials, if they're coming down here to Earth to interact with humans, is that reasonable? Because what's we described in the Men in Black scenario is verbal communication, as opposed to mental communication, which is more along the lines of the abduction scenario. In Men in Black, we're talking about verbal communication. I can't think of a single UFO occupant case where the occupant of the UFO actually spoke English. I don't know. I think I think it strongly suggests that these things are not alien per se. Of course, I could be completely wrong, but I don't know what the motivation would be for them to want to motivate somebody not to talk about their sighting. I don't know. It seems like a very earthly reason to intimidate witness.
With all of these things, it's almost like a statement. So if I send in somebody in a black suit with funny makeup, shave their eyebrows, and then the witness then talks about that, you see, to me, it would undermine. I can't see why aliens would do that. If aliens, as you say, have advanced technology, then there are other ways to do things like that. Seems to me like that would be a good way to discredit any witness. Really, I mean, you know, or you know, assuming it did happen and people weren't just making it up, and there are a number of these things over many, many years where I think that the idea that all of them were made up seems to me unlikely. So some of them must have happened. If they happened, then whoever's organising that happening, that's a great way to just for people to dismiss the credibility of the witness and say, well, there's some other BS that Bob has made up. You know, Men in Black have visited him, just like the movie, you know, with Will Smith. You know, I mean, I'll give you. I mean, there was another thing I was reading about with Dan Aykroyd, and Dan Aykroyd was saying that he was looking to make a show about these sort of things and about these ideas, and suddenly a car pulled up, and some what he described as very sinister Men in Black type figures were staring at him, and then his show got cancelled. So so you have this. I mean, it might be if it was an alien. I can't see why they would do that. I mean, if they have the power to abduct people, then surely that's a better way of getting information themselves. But I don't know what you think.
No, very much so. Yeah, you would think that an extraterrestrial would have some other way of accomplishing the same thing without direct interaction with a human, without verbal interaction, without resorting to physical threats. And the motivations for not talking about the UFO topic seem very, very human in nature. I mean, would aliens if I was an alien, I mean, would I worry if my ship was seen over Seattle, Washington by 20 people? Not really. I mean, I traveled across the universe to get to here. I mean, it wouldn't bother me if anybody saw my craft, but it may bother some group here on Earth. There's clearly that motivation here on Earth. So and like the rest of the UFO topic, the majority of these sightings are being reported by honest, intelligent people. They simply don't know what they witnessed. They can't wrap their head around it. There's very little hoaxing in the UFO field. There is very little hoaxing. There's a lot of misidentification, but there's very little hoaxing. So these events are happening, and interactions are happening. People are seeing these things. They're witnessing these things. They're interacting with these Men in Black. We just don't know what they are. But my gut tells me that it's probably some government/military organization, some effort to lessen the importance of the topic, which is interesting because the opposite happens. We know more about these UFO cases because there was a Men in Black component to them. So their efforts have been in vain, a little bit.
Yeah, it's not a successful tactic because all it does ultimately is it might, in the short term, discredit the witness, but it perpetuates the story and people speculate about it. So it's a bad tactic, really, because you're bringing it into popular mythology. But maybe, you know, with this shift in certainly the consciousness of the establishment in this discussion of parallel universes and the official now Pentagon releases of UFOs, which look like, as we said, classic UFOs, we're seeing a move towards a softening, a move towards public acceptance of this phenomena, or trying to get the public to accept this phenomena. I mean, I'm always waiting for what they might call the grand release, when the government officially turns around and says, actually, we know that these things are real. We know that this alien life is real. I mean, I think Obama was once on the verge of it and then sort of seemed to pull back a bit. How near do you think we are from that particular?
I just don't think there's any motivation for the government or the military to disclose anything they have. Although I think there's an effort to. They seem to be at least some aspects of the government or military, and those two groups may not always work in unison very well. At least here in the States, they don't. There seems to be a loosening up. In other words, they're getting more open. They're getting more comfortable releasing content to the public, like these videos, which would have never happened before. It's never occurred. You never had this. You never got access to gun camera footage. Never happened at all. Now it's happened. So it seems like they're getting more open. As to why they're getting more open, why are they getting more comfortable releasing this stuff, I don't know. I discussed this with a friend of mine who's a researcher, and he said maybe there was an event. Maybe the event transpired that the public doesn't know about, but it was so in your face that it motivated a change. And that's certainly a possibility. But that's a small step. I don't know if disclosure will ever happen, but it's an interesting step in and of itself.
Yeah, you see, that's what I've been sort of building towards the sort of last few minutes of the show, really. I am getting a perception that we are building more towards this event, or there has been some sort of event which is making it more pressing to release this information quicker. I can't put, it's an intangible perception of mine, but it's still a perception based on the way things are going and the way information is being released. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I think that's a possibility. I don't know if it'll happen because it's been promised for several decades now. But but what's different now is that we have access to these videos. That's what's different. So if we take that into account, and again, the government's not telling us those are alien spacecraft. They're just saying that the Pentagon's telling us that they are not hoaxed. They're authentic videos of UFOs. So they're still unidentified. But the fact that we have them is important. So we may be taking a small baby step towards some level of openness. Maybe not full disclosure, but at least an acceptance by the government to tell us what may be going on, that there's something going on and it has been going on for a while now, and kind of confirm what a lot of people feel. That's a positive thing. So this may be this may be the first small step. We'll see.
Well, I certainly hope so. We're almost out of time. What's next for you, William? Do you want to tell our listeners what you're up to?
Oh, I've been doing my programs on From Beyond This Earth, thanks to you gentlemen, and I've been doing my own programs, audio commentaries and video presentations on my blog page, doing a lot of research here at home because we're all incarcerated. We can't leave home here in Texas, so so I'm doing a lot more research in depth because I've been unable to do any public appearances or lecturing for the last 2 months. So it's been a lot of behind-the-scenes research and talking to witnesses. That's been keeping up all my time.
Excellent. Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on here, and I know for those people who want to follow what William does, he's part of the Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena team, and he does his own regular broadcasts on our show. So you can listen out to some of those. They're on the YouTube channel, the Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena YouTube. He's done some excellent recordings recently for us on those, and I'd advise you to have a listen to those. They really are well worth listening to. Some excellent work. So it's been our pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on tonight, and find William's shows on from Beyond Not of This Earth, so you can see those under the Undiscovered Beasts and Strange Phenomena. Again, thank you very much, William. We really
Adam,
appreciate
thanks
it.
again. Thanks again, sir.
Good stuff. Well, that's it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. That was William Pullin talking about a fascinating topic, the real Men in Black. Next week, Mike and I will be back talking to Bart Catino about Bigfoot. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good night.